Chapter 18. My fondest memory of Badrinath is one of driving into the valley with the Nara and Narayan mountains on the either side covered in snow. The usual time for Ma's visit to Badrinath was in the month of October or early November after the Navaratri Puja in Kenchi, and it would often coincide with the festival of Deepavali. With only a few days left for the closure of the temple, there would be hardly any pilgrims left in Badrinath. The small market, which was the main hub of activity, now looks deserted. Most of the shops were locked and covered with planks and tin sheets to protect them from snow. However, a number of mysterious looking ascetics could be seen seated in clusters, long haired, wearing tattered rags, smoking cannabis with chillums in their hands. In Badrinath, we always stayed at the Andhra Dharamshala. Right below Ma's room was the kuti of Bhagwati Mai, one of the few saints who was contemporary to Ma. Bhagwati Mai was of Nepalese origin, and having been widowed at the early age of 16, she had come to Badrinath on a pilgrimage with her parents. Upon reaching the temple, after a journey undertaken largely on foot, she had a divine revelation, and she resolved to spend her entire life at the feet of the Lord of Badri, Sri Badri Narayan. In Badrinath, every morning when the temple doors opened as early as 4 a.m., Bhagwati Mai would be the first one to walk up the steps to the mandir. Chanting Sanskrit shlokas from Srimad Bhagavad in her beautiful sonorous voice, she would circumambulate the temple. On Ekadashi, the 11th day of every lunar fortnight of the Hindu calendar, Bhagwati Mai would sit in Padmasan on the Narada Shila on the Alaknanda river and recite the entire Srimad Bhagavad Puran from dawn to dusk, undeterred by rain, hail, or snow. She could recite the 88,000 shlokas of the Srimad Bhagavad from memory. Invariably, when we reached Badrinath, temperatures would be down to sub zero. While we got busy settling the mothers in, Ma's first welcome came from Bhagwati Mai, in the form of burning wood fire in a metal container, followed by hot potatoes cooked in mustard oil and tea. Nothing could be more desirable in that weather. In that freezing cold of Badrinath, Ma always went to the Tapta Kund for a holy dip any time between midnight and 2 a.m. I learned that Maharaji had told the mothers that whenever they were in Badrinath, they should be the first ones to bathe in the sulphur springs. And so, Ma and Choti Mataji barely slept at night. As soon as the moment was right, Ma would walk out of the Dharamshala, bare feet in ankle deep snow, Choti Mataji following her, and behind them, one or two of us holding a basket with their clothes. We walked down the steps leading to the kund in the darkness of that cold night that was broken only by dim bulbs strung on poles that cast little pools of light on our way. Clouds of steam would be gushing out of the sulphur water in the Tapta Kund. According to the legend, Agni Dev had once asked Badrinath Ji how could he serve him. Badrinath Ji had said that Agni should flow in the form of water for the pilgrims who came to Badrinath Ji's darshan. And so, the god of fire took the form of the sulphur water in the Tapta Kund. Oblivious to very high temperatures of water, Ma would step into the kund. The rest of us found it very difficult to keep up with her effortless pace. Ma would go as close as possible to the source of the hot water and recite some mantras and Hanuman Chalisa. We knew that sulphur fumes could be toxic and most ordinary people would be out of the kund in less than a minute. I remember, however, that we had some of the most exquisite darshans of sages during these snans. It was the night of Sharad Purnima one year. As Ma entered the kund, a sage with lotus like eyes was sitting in a Padmasana at the edge of water near the Gaumukh. Seeing Ma, he said, तुम आ गए आज शरद पूर्णिमा है पानी बहुत गर्म है लो मेरे कमंडल से नहा लो You have come. It's Sharad Purnima today. The water is very hot. Use my kamandal to take your bath. After saying these words, he walked a few steps and then was not seen thereafter. Later, Ma left his kamandal by the kund. On another occasion, another year, an old sadhu with jatas so long that they were nearly sweeping the ground was crouching in a corner and singing stutis in praise of Sri Radha. After Ma had taken her snan, she was standing in the fuming hot water reciting prayers. I was next to her. I saw the sadhu dive into the Kund, swim to Ma under water and touch her feet. Then he came out slowly and walked away. After Snan, Ma would put on fresh clothes, wrap a shawl around herself, and then walk up the steps to Badrinath Ji's shrine. The temple would be closed at this time, and Ma would offer her pranam at the doorstep. It would still be dark. One day after pranam, she pointed to a light gleaming atop the Nara mountain. Ma said, "Dekh, woh Kuber ka mandir hai. See, that Kuber's temple." I looked up and saw an unusual glow on the top of the mountain. In my 4 decades with Ma, we went to Badrinath many times. But to me, it still feels like yesterday. I just have to close my eyes and I can see Ma on those dark nights walking up the Badrinath temple, her wet hair tied in a knot above her head, her form tall and stately. She treads on soft feet, almost like in a trance like state. Repeat. She treads on soft feet, almost in a trance like state, a being from a higher world. During one of our trips to Badrinath, a few members of our group expressed a wish to see Manna Gaon, which is the last village and the Indian checkpost on the Indo China border. We drove to Bhimpul, saw Manna Gaon, and got a chance to talk to the beautiful women of that village who lived in the belief that they were gopis of Lord Narayan. Then we spent some time in the vicinity of Bhimpul, taking a short break when Ma asked us if we would like to go and see the Vasudhara fall. She went on to tell us that it's so holy that even a single drop of water from the fall is considered a blessing. A few of us immediately opted to trek there, perhaps more so because Ma herself wished to go. Some of us who chose to stay back took Choti Mataji back to Badrinath. There was a narrow mountain path leading to Vasudhara, and from here it was 5 or 6 kilometer trek up the hill. The Dhara gushes down from a 400 feet high cliff which stands at an altitude of 12,000 feet above sea level. It was the month of November, and we had barely walked a few kilometers when the entire scenery turned into a panorama of snow and ice. The only sign of life was red-billed choughs flying in the clear blue sky. These singular birds from the crow family have black bodies with red beaks, red legs, and claws. The trek felt never ending. After covering a considerable distance, we could finally see the Vasudhara, a thin silver stream falling as though from the sky. The last bit of the climb was extremely steep. After every turn on the winding path, we thought we were there, and yet the truth was that we were still far away. Reaching the base of the mountain from where the water falls below, we saw a huge glacier, like a giant block of ice, almost 40 feet long and not less than 20 feet wide. We somehow managed to climb to the top of it. Looking below upon the other side, we saw there was a steep drop down to a frozen stream which separated us from Vasudhara. Unable to go any further, we simply stood around, imbibing the celestial beauty of the scene around us. I then saw Ma taking off her sweater, saying that she would like to bathe in the Vasudhara. I was stunned. First, there was a steep drop from the glacier, a frozen stream to be crossed below, and finally an almost perpendicular cliff which had to be climbed to reach the fall. I said to Ma that it was impossible to go there. Ma replied, "महाराज जी कहते थे मैं हमेशा साथ रहूंगा." Maharaj ji used to say, "I will always be with you." At that moment, these words made no sense to me. Looking around for some sort of a path down the glacier in that lifeless snow all around, I spotted, far, far away in the distance, a figure in flame orange walking briskly towards us. I pointed him out to Ma, suggesting we should ask the sadhu if there was any way to get to Vasudhara. When the sadhu reached the top of the glacier, I saw that he seemed to be in his early 20s, and from the way he looked around, it appeared he was familiar with the mountain terrain. I approached him and asked if he could show us a way to the falls as Ma wished to bathe in the Vasudhara. In reply, he merely shrugged his shoulders. I did not know what to make of this. He now took off his orange shawl, unwrapped the orange cloth around his waist, and with just a loincloth on his body, he started walking down the glacier. I noticed that when he had been coming towards us, his pace was fast. But now his every footstep was slow and carefully measured, his bare feet leaving a clear track on the snow. Ma started to follow him, placing her feet carefully on the sadhu's footprints. We descended from the glacier and reached the frozen stream. The sadhu turned around, took Ma's hand, and slowly walked her across the frozen rivulet. Next came the vertical cliff. The sadhu started climbing, holding on to rocks with his hand and propelling himself up with his feet. Ma followed him and began to climb up with comparative ease. The rest of us formed a chain and climbed behind Ma, one behind the other. Fear gripped me that if one boulder rolled down, we would all be dead in the frozen stream. Finally, we made it up to the fall. The sadhu left us, and climbing further, he went to the highest rock at a distance, sat in a cross legged posture, and closed his eyes to meditate. I was overwhelmed by the ethereal beauty, the grandeur of the fall. We all sprinkled a little water on ourselves. Ma suddenly asked me, "Did you throw water on me?" Before I could answer, I turned around and actually saw the fall sway forward like a curtain blown by the wind to spray Ma with a shower of water. I remember that it was a bright sunny day. The rays of the sun were falling on the water at such angle so as to create rainbows almost every second. And these rainbows, sometimes vertical, sometimes horizontal, would encircle Ma as she bathed in the sacred waters of Vasudhara. It was perhaps the most beautiful scene I have ever seen in my life. Later, we all bathed in the waterfall. As we had no prior plans to go to the Vasudhara, we were not carrying any change of clothes. Ma sat on one of the rocks and we all chanted some prayers. About half an hour must have passed when the sadhu, who was sitting high above us, came down and started to walk back. We too got up and followed him, almost frozen in our wet clothes. He led Ma down just the way he had brought her up. Once we reached the top of the glacier, he left us and went to where his clothes were. His back was towards us. As he wrapped the length of the orange cloth around his waist, I noticed that there were two or three big patches on his skin upon his lower back. I quickly drew Ma's attention to this. Ma often told me that Baba had big patches of fungal infection on his back from the days he did sadhana underwater in a lake in Babania in Gujarat. Baba's vest, kept in the relics shelf in Kechi, still have the mark of the medicine applied by Ma on the fungal patches. Ma gave a knowing smile and repeated that he had promised he would always be with her. The sadhu now started to walk back. Again, we tried to follow, but such was his pace that it was not possible for us to keep up with him. Soon, the orange figure was out of our sight. On the way back stood the Vyasa Gufa, the cave where the great sage Vyasa is said to have written the epic Mahabharata. After sitting there for a little while, we returned to Badrinath. This was the night of the Dipavali festival. Very few people could be seen around Badrinath. The scene was familiar. It was freezing cold, the lights were dim, and the sulfur fumes from the Tapta Kund could be seen soaring high. Inside the temple premises, preparations on for the special Lakshmi Puja which was performed on Dipavali night. We offered our evening prayers in Ma's room in the Andhra Dharamshala. Jalebis had been brought for Prasad that night from one of the local shops. A priest from the temple came to call us for the Lakshmi Puja. Ma told everyone to go. A plate of jalebis was to be left behind, and the rest were to be offered to the temple. As I was about to leave, Ma asked me and another member of our group to stay back. When all had left, Ma picked up the plate of jalebis and asked us to distribute it to the sadhus in the temple. She warned us not to be scared, as some of them may react in an unpleasant ways. We went out with our jalebis. It must have been about 8 p.m., but felt like midnight outside. True to Ma's words, some sadhus accepted the sweets, while some showed anger and refused them. As we crossed from one side of the temple to the other, we saw the same flame orange figure coming towards us. He said, मैं तुम्हारे लिए रुका था. I had been waiting for you. This was the first time he spoke. Taking the whole plate of jalebis from our hands, he almost ran down to the steps to the Alaknandara bridge and merged into the darkness.